But I mean, you and I were just chatting before I hit record. Holy D2 football. Like, have we been spoiled this year? I feel like we've been spoiled this year a lot.
You know what the beauty of D2 football is, I talk with the guys at d2football.com a lot, and I talk to other beat writers, and I feel like I say that every year, right? Every year you come in and you have these expectations and you make your preseason rankings and it all goes haywire by week 2. And I love it.
Yes. And you talk about week 1, that opener. Mind obviously goes to the Mines game against GV, and I don't know if you could possibly set the bar higher for what our expectations are watching. I mean, obviously those two teams, but also just throughout the landscape, week by week.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, week 1 every year should be Grand Valley State and Mines. There's no two ways about it. They don't fail to impress. They're two of the best teams. You could wipe the rosters clean, and they're going to always be two of the best teams. So that's great. But it's like you said, every week we get a couple of these big ranked games. The first 3 weeks of the season, as we saw this past week, you get a couple FCS matchups. The Ferris State one was incredible. The West Florida one, in all honesty, their defense played amazing in that first half. The offense just couldn't find rhythm. So the final score, the defense was gassed. They were on the field the whole time. The final score does not indicate how well that defense played in that game against a nationally ranked FCS school,
Absolutely.
So you get a lot of great matchups these first 3 weeks that kind of set the tone for the season and see where we're going from there.
Let's start right with that, man. Let's start with the Bulldogs. Number one, I watched a good amount of that game. We're sitting around. It's on ESPN Plus, and at some point, I'm sitting there with my buddies, and my one teammate's in the couch. He's like, "Fuck it, I'll pay $10 for ESPN Plus. We're putting this on. Like, at this point, we need to." So we tune in, and that's when they're going down the field. They had that interesting maybe fumble situation. You're like, that's over, and then it's returned. We're so back. They convert, and then taken away from them right at that last minute. But just talk some big takeaways from that one. Obviously, Ferris's defense, that physical style of play. I know a lot of people didn't know if that would translate against a much bigger, stronger, at least supposedly more imposing FCS squad over there in Montana.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, if you watched it and those announcers just kept saying it, the fact that they went into that stadium and didn't once lose their composure, not once. And that place was loud every time they were in the red zone. If you ask me, they had that game, right?
Oh, yeah.
Early on, they went on 4th down inside scoring territory. The last drive, they were in scoring territory on 4th down. They missed a field goal. I think they showed the world that it's what you said, their defense, it's their signature. Yes. Tony coach could beat people with anyone at quarterback, and that's been his thing. He'll find these athletic guys that could play, former lacrosse players that become the best quarterback in D2, and he finds these guys that know how to do his system and win, and he tailors the system to their needs. But the bottom line is, they're fast, they're quick, they're powerful. And Montana didn't know what was coming, and you could tell that they were overmatched, at points. Obviously Montana regrouped, but that first half, it was all Ferris State, if you ask me. And it kind of showed the world that D2 could play.
I mean, that was incredible. And you talk about that quarterback tandem they have going on right now with a guy like Gulker, who we saw last year. We know he has a nose for the end zone, especially when they get anywhere inside that red gold zone, depending on what coach you ask, whatever. But looking at Malik and what he brings to that offense as well, a great soundbite I liked from Anise earlier in the week is talking about, what is really the reasoning for going to a place like Montana. And you talked about it already, the atmosphere. And he had said that, in an Anchor Bone Classic, like, you're going to get that place packed. I don't care if you play out in the Kroger parking lot. But at a place like this, where that stadium shows up and shows out, we talked about it on this show a lot. Like, what the hell else do they have to do out there? Like, it's a football game. Everyone in there is there. For them to have that type of playoff atmosphere and to have that type of training for maybe the new faces on that roster, how valuable is that for them?
Yeah, I mean, well, you kind of mentioned it, right? First of all, let's be real. Lubbers Stadium, Grand Valley State, that's not a D2 stadium,
yes.
the average D2. So you look at what Ferris State has done, and, they've played these teams. They play in McKinney all the time. They're ready for the spotlight, right? They're ready for the best of the best. And when they play the Super Region 3, it's no joke. So the teams that they played, I think that's what made them ready for this. Now, at the same sense, can any D2 school walk into Montana do what Ferris State did? Of course not, right?
Yep.
Like Ferris State, we're talking, there's a handful of teams that could probably do with enough time to prepare what Ferris State did. But I think what they've been through the last, really since 2018, since they lost that national championship game to Valdosta State, the teams they've played, the stages they played on, like this, they were ready for this, like, and it showed. And so when you're asking what lessons they could take away, I don't think it was any lessons. I think it's just they're going back and they're being like, what we do works, right? Like what we do works. We are the number one team in the country, and they could that's a huge confidence boost that they came out of there losing by a score. And that's bad. That's bad for everyone else in D2.
Right. And they get a bye now, and then we have them on the road at their place. That's going to be
homecoming too, right?
That's a tough one. Yeah, their homecoming game. Our boys from Northern up here will travel down there, but we can move on down the list. Talk about just briefly on Mines. Obviously, a team of that caliber is going to beat teams they're supposed to beat. That offense is ridiculous. I mean, enough said. Like, what is it about this squad, man? Just moving forward, we've seen them play a couple really marquee matchups early on. I know this week is Pueblo next up on the docket for them.
Yeah. And that's the big thing about them, and the same with I have Grand Valley State tied at number 3. The two of them, the past 2 years, and Angelo State you could throw into the mix the past few years, they test themselves early on, right? The schedule that Mines has, and if you remember, Mines lost those 2 first games last year, playing Angelo and Grand Valley, and obviously they lost the last game. They won everything in between. So you got a guy like Matoka, who's arguably, I don't know who's better than him at quarterback in D2, and you have that experience coming back, and you have that defense it's just aggressive. They're the sack, they led D2 in sacks. They're aggressive. You have that experience come back, and there's definitely a chip on your shoulder that, hey, people have question marks about us because we did lose. You lost Zeman, you lost a couple big time pieces.
Yep.
They have question marks after the way we showed up against Ferris State. Let's go out and prove the world, who we are. And they're showing it right now. They have 3 really impressive wins. I know Adams State wasn't the Grand Valley State or Angelo State they played, but they won 70-7, right? Yeah. This past week. Like, when they're not taking the pedal off the metal for anyone this year. They're showing what they're capable of. And, they will say, you hear a lot of it, and if you look at the history, it speaks it. It's Super Region 3 or the Gulf South, right? That's it. And there's teams out there, and Colorado School of Mines is one of them that wants to show that, hey, there's other teams that can win, and they're showing that they're one of them.
Absolutely. And that was all the conversation, when I tuned into that Grand Valley State broadcast in the beginning was, oh, well, they didn't show up very well against the GLIAC foe, blah, blah, blah. And then they start out that game, and it looked like they were going to blow it open for a little bit, and you're like, oh. Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah. So talk about a team that, they do what they're supposed to do as far as Mines goes. A team that overachieved this last week, at least in my opinion. Grand Valley State, they have Assumption coming to town and just blew the brakes off the Greyhounds in their home stadium, and they looked really good. Coach Wooster had talked about how, they've been one of the best first and fourth quarter teams in the country, but second and third quarter, all of a sudden, the wheels have kind of fallen off for them. So for them to put together a actual wire-to-wire win over an Assumption team that is a quality opponent, that for them, speaks volumes about where they've been able to rebound and where, they're going to head into conference play with a ton of momentum.
Yeah. Look, Grand Valley State, I had them number 2 coming into the year. The talent they have returning, and they even lost some big names, but Abe Swanson, Cade Peterson, these aren't just great players, they're leaders, right? And when you're playing, your biggest rival is the 2-time defending national champ. You're going to be motivated, and sure, they played a heck of a first game, and you lost it at the buzzer to the defending runners up. There's no shame in that. This is still a top 3 team. They have the experience. They will be able to test themselves, right? I think they have Saginaw Valley next. I believe that's who they play.
That sounds right, yeah.
They have a bye this week, and then I think they open against SVSU. So you're talking about 4 straight teams that are garnering top 25. If they're not in the top 25, they've been receiving votes all season long.
Yep.
And they've handled themselves well, and they're putting up the numbers. But as you mentioned with Assumption, a 2022 playoff team, they needed that. They needed a win where from the first whistle to that last whistle, there was no question after their first two games. They went to the wire twice with the Colorado Powers, and then they just came home and they're like, all right, this is it. And that could be a big turning point for the season because Assumption's no joke, and they made it look very easy.
No, I'm with that, and that very easy is like, obviously it wasn't, but that was the way watching that game, man. It felt like everything that could go for them was going for them. Now, in that next grouping here, you've got Pittsburgh State tied at 3. They have a little bit of a scare this last week. Central Missouri knew that one was going to be very competitive. Obviously, the offense from the Mules, super explosive. But for them to stay in that contest, Pittsburgh State has actually kind of given us a couple scares the last couple weeks. That first half against Fort Hays, who now turns around and upsets Northwest Missouri State this last weekend. So maybe not as much of a fluke, I guess, that last week for the Gorillas as we were thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the MIAA is wild, right? Like even there's a lot of new faces in Nebraska Kearney. Yep. They're having some troubles this year. Washburn lost a wild one, right? Like all these teams that we thought were going to be the top are kind of like, well, where'd Fort Hays State come from, right? Like it's like, and they're hanging with the big guys. So but I think Pittsburgh State, I think ultimately their defense is just it's superb. I do think that MIAA is really, really tough this year. I mean, Missouri Southern was dropping like 30 points a game. It's like all these teams are stepping up to the challenge now. And Pitt State, they kind of shift the switch last year by winning the MIAA, right? It's been Bearcats country for so long that sure, other teams make the playoffs from the MIAA, but finally it was like, you may be too young for this. I may be dating myself, but when Rocky and Drago are fighting,
oh, come on now,
finally in the seventh round, like Rocky cuts Drago and they're like, he's bleeding, he's cut. Like that's what it felt like last year, right? Like there's actually a new person coming out of the MIAA. And so I think everyone's stepping up their game, but I do think Pittsburgh State's defense, I think that's inevitably the thing that will put them over the edge and what holds them off. But you mentioned it, Central Missouri, I had them in my top 25 last week.
Okay.
Coming into this game. And I just think their offense, I mentioned it in one of my pieces. It's like the Brooke Bowles offense from about 4 years ago. And Brooke Bowles was just ridiculous quarterback. And that team would score 50 points a game, no matter who the defense was or who they were playing. And they have it looks a lot like that right now, that they're not going to shy down from anybody.
I hear you there, man. Now this next, I'll kind of group them here. It's talking about 5 through 7. You've got Minnesota State, Mankato. You've got Bemidji State at 6. You got Ouachita Baptist at number 7. 3 teams, we've seen the talent. We've seen the epitome of consistency, but 3 teams nonetheless that, haven't really been, I guess, tested in the same way, like battle tested at these other teams that we've talked about. I guess talk about that for these 3 guys heading into the year, because like I said, we've seen the talent, we've seen the possibilities, and being in, the 2 of them being in the NSIC, which is, could have a lot of parity in that conference. What are you seeing from these 3 squads?
I think it's a lot of what you said right now, right? It's what we know. And these are programs that are going to come out there and they're going to take care of business. And that's exactly what they've done. I agree. They haven't been, like, if you look at their strength of schedule, it's not lighting the world on fire, but they've done exactly what they were supposed to do. Minnesota State, I thought they were top 10 for most of the last year. I was just really impressed with how they turned the corner. It's like you joke, they had one bad year in the last like 10 years and it wasn't even bad. They just didn't make the playoffs, right?
And they get written off all of a sudden.
And they get completely written off. And then last year they're like, guess what? We're still here. And they're even building up more momentum. And they just look like, Shen Butler Lawson, it looks like the guy can't be stopped right now. It's amazing what he's doing. And when you have that defense and him controlling the clock, you're in trouble, right? Bemidji, I think the impressive part for them so far, again, the competition isn't a Minnesota State or anything yet, but their defense has been impressive. They're used to winning shootouts because of Brandon Alt.
Yeah.
So far, their defense has been impressive. And Ouachita is Ouachita. I mean, they're going to run the ball down your throat. They're going to throw it exactly when they need you and be completely efficient when they do. And then their defense isn't going to let you score. And that's just wash, rinse, repeat, right? That's their recipe for success. Now, granted, they get to the tough part of the schedule and you got Harding and Henderson State to go through. The end of your season is no easy run. So, they have to win these games. They don't have a choice if they want to lock up a postseason bid.
I hear you. And we had the chance to have Trey Vavel and then Shem Butler Lawson also on the show, and he had talked like my quote. I always try and find the one quote, for the little social post or whatever. And he had said like, "We're just trying to get back to old school Mankato football." And I'm like, "That's what they're doing, man. Their time of possession, just like eating clock. You go on an 8-minute drive, and then the defense knows they got to come right back out in the field and suffer again through the same thing. Like that is demoralizing. Like that is so demoralizing for a squad. When you just know that style of offense is coming, and it's what are you going to do about it? So I'm excited to see them, as they move through that NSIC and see what's going on with them. But we can switch over to the Gulf South a little bit. Delta State, West Florida, got them flipped this week as opposed to last. West Florida coming off that game against FAMU where really, I guess the moral of the story, offense just couldn't get going. Pee-wee, super out of rhythm. Kudos more so to Florida A&M just getting in there, applying consistent pressure. And then Delta State, an upset over an FCS opponent, albeit, probably not the same level of FCS between the two of them there. Obviously, there's levels to it.
Yeah, and typically I don't let an FCS game affect my rankings, but 3-0 is 3-0, and West Florida is 2-1, and really the week before West Florida was 8 and Delta State was 9, and they were really right there. It's right here, and West Florida's defense has been ridiculous. They allowed 6 points going into the FCS game. Delta State, both of these teams for me they weren't in my preseason top 10, but they were top 10 teams, if that makes sense. There was just a huge amount of question marks. Sure, you had Shegog coming back in Delta State, but not a lot of everybody else. And don't forget, 2 years ago, they weren't a playoff team, right? They were a 500 team. Patrick Shegog comes in, and all of a sudden they're a steamroller, and they're taken down. I remember they were on the road for like 6 of their first 7 games last year, and they just steamrolled everyone on the road. West Florida, Pete Shinnick, I mean, the guy was what he did is there should be stories written, like books written about it. The guy walked in and was in a national championship game, right? It's like, who does that?
It's absurd.
So you have a new coach come in, you have a couple new changes on defense. Shamari Mason leaves town. David Durden's on the Cowboys, for crying out loud. Like this team lost some major stars. You lost arguably one of the best, obviously not long tenure. He wasn't there long enough, but what he did in the time there, Pete Shinnick's one of the greatest D2 coaches ever, and it was all gone. So that being said, I think they're a top 10 program, but I had to see what they were capable of doing. And I've seen that. And the same with Delta State. And now they're both where I think they should be. And now that they're getting in the heart of Gulf South play, don't be surprised to see both of them start jumping up the rankings should another team lose.
I hear you, man. That's how I feel all of these guys are, right? Like the word is opportunistic. Like you're just waiting for one of these teams to fold or take a misstep. And, if that was the Gorillas this last night, then all these teams are kind of getting ready to just make that next jump. But this last squad, no different. Emporia State, Braden Gleason, that offense, the 29-year streak ended. I didn't believe that stat when I read that the first time. That was absurd. But this squad hosting, is it UCO this week?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There you go. What have you seen from those guys, man? It's going to be, it seems to be a pretty potent start from them, and let's see if they can keep it going.
Yeah, the one thing I want to pull up that is crazy for you, you said the 29 years thing. Yeah. Northwest Missouri State is out of the AFCA top 25 for the first time in 242 straight weeks.
That is
2003. So
man,
that's just all that's to say is there's clearly a changing of the guard in the MIAA. I think, Emporia State set that tone by they went into Maryville and ended that streak. I think, we're talking about great quarterbacks, and I've been saying it all year that I think Braden Gleason is something special. He's been showing it. It's not just he's not just a chucker. He's so efficient. I don't believe he has an interception yet this year. So you're talking about a guy with double-digit touchdowns and no interceptions through 3 games. That's against quality teams. That's a good sign of things to come. And the defense has played well. I don't know how the defense holds up against some of the other teams as the season's going, but I've been high on them since the preseason rankings. And I think that. I have a formula that I kind of do when I do my Power 10, and I have to take some of the selection committee metrics in it, but some of it is just looking at the team and talking to the coaches and seeing what's there. And when they come in and you're higher on a team and it's kind of like, okay, let these guys prove me wrong. So far, they haven't proved me wrong. So I'm going to keep giving them the honor of being a top 10 team until they prove me wrong. You right?
Oh yeah, man. I hear you there. But I guess last piece for you. You had the first 5 out. Talk about some squads like Benedict, Lenore Ryan, Harding, Slippery Rock, Virginia Union, all these guys who have had some, obviously they're in the conversation. They've had some pretty impressive wins. You know, you put them in alphabetical order. Is there one squad here that you feel is maybe more primed to make that jump and surprise some people in these next couple weeks?
It's tough because Slippery Rock is always that squad. Slippery Rock is always a squad that could just, I mean, they already are doing it, but if they catch fire, you're not stopping that offense. And it's so weird that you could put any quarterback in there and any wide receivers, and they are always going to be 3, one quarterback, 2 wide receivers. It's going to be 3 of the most fun players to watch any year. It doesn't matter who they are. So they're always on there, but I think it's Harding at this point. Okay. Harding is the consistency that they have. They deserve to be that. If there's a first out, I think that's Harding. They do it time and time again. You talk about ball control, right? This is a team that there's 25 running backs, it feels like, on that team. No one's going to have 100 yards. It's going to be like 5 guys with 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they're just going to run it down your throat and not let you score, and they do it better than just about anybody else. But, all 5 of these teams are deserving of being there, in my opinion. But if you're asking me, like, who that first out, I think it's –
Yeah, I got to put you on the spot at least once, you know what I mean? I've been throwing up layups here. I got to throw you maybe a little off speed or something.